Hello everyone, it's been a while, good to see you again. Bitcoin is a geopolitical reality. Let me ask you this. Are Twitter and Facebook geopolitical realities in international politics? You could say yes, you might say no. But if you say no, you'll probably need a clear explanation to support your claim. Saying yes, however, is usually the more reasonable response. For example, the Arab Spring in 2010, which Facebook proudly cites as proof of its global impact. Twitter and Facebook had a huge influence, and there have been many other moments where public gatherings brought about political change. You all know those stories. When you look back at the role social networks have played in those kinds of events, you'll see their influence was often decisive. But that's not the case in every country. China, for instance, appears to have complete and flexible control over it. There, social media may serve as a political tool, but it's hard to call it a true geopolitical force. Bitcoin, on the other hand, has been challenging governments from the very beginning. It's taking on both the US and Chinese governments. So when Bitcoin crosses borders, it's on a completely different level from Facebook or Twitter. After all, Facebook and Twitter never really go beyond borders, but Bitcoin truly crosses borders. And more than that, Bitcoin carries intrinsic value. So if you consider social media a geopolitical reality, Bitcoin is, beyond question, a geopolitical reality. And if you think smartphones and the mobile revolution are reshaping the geopolitical landscape, Bitcoin is an even more significant geopolitical reality. This is exactly what economists have been missing. Bitcoin was, from the very beginning, a geopolitical reality. But economists simply don't have a geopolitical framework. I mean, economics itself doesn't have one. The discipline can't, but economists, being more than theorists, could have built that framework. Economists, as wise people who have studied economics, could have also studied geopolitics on the side. They could have found a balance between the two, but they failed to do so. Even economists with a sense of geopolitics couldn't see it in Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin appeared to be a monetary phenomenon. It is a monetary phenomenon, yes. So they saw it as a subject for economic analysis just because it looked like a monetary phenomenon. But that's not the case. Bitcoin is more a matter of geopolitics than of economics. Why? Because it's a store of value that moves freely across borders. And that affects not only trade, but also capital outflows, capital flight, and even the hiding of wealth. It's an enormous geopolitical reality. I think the US started to recognize and study this around 2014 or 2015. We saw evidence of that in late 2013 when an assistant attorney general testified before the US Senate. When asked by senators whether Bitcoin was being used for crime, instead of answering the question, the Assistant Attorney General said he sees Bitcoin as a tool that can promote healthy international trade. That was a remarkable statement, and Bitcoin's price skyrocketed afterward. Let's go back to what lies ahead. As the Federal Reserve continues to shrink its balance sheet, Bitcoin will likely face stronger shocks. So should you sell all your Bitcoin? Well, for now it might be better to wait and see how things unfold. Because when the US Federal Reserve tightens policy and shrinks its balance sheet, the global economy faces a hard reality check. Companies that were surviving on easy money can't hold on anymore. As these weak firms collapse, geopolitical crises begin to emerge across regions. Now, what do we mean by geopolitical crisis? Take Kazakhstan, for example. If things go wrong there, it can quickly turn into a geopolitical flashpoint. Ukraine is the clearest example of a geopolitical crisis. If North Korea's nuclear program spirals out of control, the Korean peninsula becomes another flashpoint. The Senkaku Islands are also a hotspot. The Taiwan Strait is also a geopolitical hotspot. Even something like Greece's debt crisis can evolve into a geopolitical one, because it could accelerate the unraveling of the European Union. In a way, that may seem like just one country's economic issue. It becomes a geopolitical crisis because it impacts a geopolitical entity like the EU. So yes, it's fair to say that the Fed's tightening could trigger geopolitical crises around the world. So when a geopolitical crisis breaks out, for individuals living in countries facing such extreme geopolitical crises, Bitcoin is the asset they can choose. That's something no other altcoin can match. Only Bitcoin commands that position. Bitcoin alone can make it happen. Back in 2014 to 2017, it might have sounded like a dream, but it's not a dream anymore. Back in July last year, CNBC and Reuters ran stories from Kabul saying, Bitcoin is the hope of the youth. You all saw those articles too, didn't you? That shows Bitcoin is becoming a reality even in remote corners of Afghanistan. As crises continue to erupt across Kazakhstan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and beyond. When people there have no other alternative, Bitcoin becomes their option. Because there are so few Bitcoins, even a country with a small population, if the people of those countries choose Bitcoin, it can have a significant impact on Bitcoin's price. We saw evidence of that during the 2017 bull run, partly driven by currency reforms in Venezuela and India. Those reforms began in late 2016, and their ripple effects fueled the 2017 surge. But first, we need to let go of this illusion that America can do everything. If you have eyes, just look around. Does America still look all-powerful to you? If America is really all-powerful, would it have shown such weakness in Afghanistan? We've entered a new chapter now, Since the fall of the Soviet Union over the decades that followed, the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, idealistic approaches to international politics were experimented with by combining them with real-world politicians. But one after another, those experiments failed. The balance has now shifted completely toward realism. That means America's control over the sea lanes of the global supply chain from the Middle East to East Asia. Even the security of these sea lanes is highly likely to be handed over to local countries. That's essentially what the Quad Alliance represents. And as for overland supply chains, America never really controlled those in the first place. Going forward, US influence there will all but disappear. That marks the end of what Henry Kissinger called the universal world order. And in a Eurasia without that order, imagine living deep in the heart of Central Asia. And right there in the middle, a geopolitical crisis suddenly breaks out. When a revolution, a military coup, or a foreign invasion causes all the banks to shut down and settlements can no longer be finalized, then you'll have to decide, what can you give your family to take with them across the border? If you're unaware, if you're not alert, you'll be caught off guard and lose everything. But those who stay aware always find a way. When those who are aware look for solutions, the real question is, what solution is truly practical? The answer, quite simply, is Bitcoin. If you've watched my videos, you've already heard me explain many times why Bitcoin is a real lifeline for people facing geopolitical crises. The problem is, as the US shrinks its balance sheet in 2022, it sends shockwaves through the global economy. Industries that grew bloated on easy money will contract and crises will start breaking out everywhere. The only question is, in which countries and in what form will those crises appear? That's the only uncertainty left, and that's what investors need to start thinking about over the next year. If you look at Bitcoin through the lens of a country's currency or its financial assets. For example, if you look at Bitcoin's past performance against the Turkish lira, you'll realize Bitcoin's volatility isn't as wild as you might think. Even when Bitcoin falls, it doesn't fall against the lira, it just slows its rate of increase. And remember, the lira is still issued by a relatively stable country, Turkey. Now imagine looking at Bitcoin in countries far less stable than Turkey. You need to consider how Bitcoin would be perceived in those countries. How will Bitcoin prove useful amid geopolitical crises and come to stand as a geopolitical reality on the international stage? To me, that's the most important development we'll witness over 2022 and 2023. If it were only about interest rates, yes, Bitcoin would fall. It would drop even faster than other assets. Then the Bitcoin skeptics will be foaming at the mouth. But Bitcoin isn't moved by interest rates alone, certainly not in the way economists think traditional assets are. It moves in response to geopolitical crises, and it reacts strongly to geopolitical crises. I just wanted to share this so you could step back and see the bigger picture. Thank you.